Yes, I've been saying for many years that really the only appropriate subject for a lightning talk was lightning. And somebody finally pushed me into doing this. How does this thing work? Okay, so this is a lightning talk about lightning, basically how lightning's generated, the effects it has on people, things, and electronics. Okay, so what is it? You all think you know what lightning is. It's an electrical discharge. It's of three types: intercloud, cloud to cloud, or ground to cloud. Ground to cloud is the most exciting, and it's the one that really concerns us. Nobody really knows what causes lightning, but what they think is that the collision of light and heavy ice particles, the light ice particles end up with a positive charge, and the heavy ones end up with a negative charge. And then the updrafts within a cloud actually carry the light ice particles to the top, which acquires a positive charge, and the bottom end of the cloud acquires a negative charge as all the heavy ice particles fall to the bottom. If you were at school when I was, you would have seen Van de Graaff generators, and this is basically the same principle. A typical lightning strike is about 100,000 amps for about 0.2 seconds. That's an awful lot of current, and it can do a certain amount of damage. And ground to cloud, as I say, is what really concerns us. Intercloud and cloud-to-cloud lightning concerns people in aeroplanes, and aeroplanes have to be designed to withstand this sort of thing. But as far as we're concerned, feet on the ground and everything else, it's ground-to-cloud. And you note I say ground-to-cloud, not cloud-to-ground. And this is why. The bottom of your cloud has a very high potential, negative high potential, and air is a pretty good insulator. But what happens when that potential builds up enough is that an ionization channel forms, and it forms quite slowly, and it sort of gradually creeps downwards through the air, not carrying very much current at all at this point until it hits the ground. At which point we now have an ionized channel, and ionized air is actually quite a good conductor. And so we now have effectively what's a conductor joining the bottom of the cloud to the ground, and the current flows up that channel from the ground up to the cloud. So it's ground-to-cloud lightning, strictly speaking. That's the stroke that does the damage. And what it looks like, well, pretty spectacular. It can really look quite exciting. Okay, let's first look at the threat to life. As things go, it's actually not very high. About 24,000 deaths annually worldwide from lightning. The mortality rate from lightning hits is about 10 to 20%. So again, which is quite low. You can actually get struck 10 times or so before you're dead. And in fact, the world record is a guy that got struck 7 times by lightning during his life and survived. It's actually in the Guinness Book of Records. Direct hits are mostly fatal, but comparatively rare. Even direct hits are not always fatal because the Faraday effect works, and people are basically bags of salty water, and salty water is a conductor, and so you end up with a skin effect, which in this case really is skin, and the current tends to flow down the outside and doesn't do a lot of damage inside. What usually kills people is standing next to trees and damp masonry. And trees and damp masonry are full of water, and water, when you pass 100,000 amps through it, gets hot very, very quickly and goes bang. And branches fall off trees, trunks explode, things fall down, and it's mostly this sort of thing that kills people. There's also an interesting effect, which is a ground current effect, where a lightning strikes over there, and you get a fairly substantial ground current flowing, and fairly substantial potential differences. And if you're standing on both feet, and again, remember you're a bag of salty water, the actual potential difference between your 2 feet is actually enough to cause substantial currents to flow up one leg and down the other. This is slightly eye-watering and can cause damage. I don't know whether you can see this one. Oh, yes, you can. Okay. Here you see the skin effect. You see the burn marks down the outside. That's actually a sort of typical spark dendritic formation. It's not blood vessels or anything like that. It's actually the results of the charge flowing. This guy, I don't know whether he was directly hit or not. Probably not. Okay, let's look at protection. Lightning rods, which is the standard form of protection. It actually increases the chance of a hit on the building concern, but it decreases the damage, hopefully. And the way it works is basically it conducts the current to ground. That 100,000 amps, instead of flowing through your damp masonry, actually travels through a piece of metal, which has got a better chance of conducting it. Lightning rods must have low resistance for obvious reasons, and they must have low impedance. And because self-impedance can actually cause substantial EMFs if the rate of change of current in the conductor is high, which it is. It typically ramps up to about 100,000 amps in 2 or 3 microseconds. And this is a fairly high di by dt. And in order to keep the impedance low, it has to be as straight as possible. So you take your lightning conductor right down the side of your building, and you try not to make it sort of go round things if you can, because when it goes round things, the current and the voltage the electricity tends to leap off and onto other things. And of course, there is a European standard for assessing the risk for lightning. And there it is, if you wish to read it. There's even computer programs that will allow you to assess the risk according to this European standard. Okay, electronics effects, which we're probably concerned about here. It's very, very rarely that a direct hit causes problems. If you get a direct hit to your electronic equipment, well, it's fried anyway, so forget about it. But induced currents actually can cause damage as well, and these are much, much more common. Typically, you will see a 1 kilovolt exponential pulse, about 1 millisecond in duration, about 10 microseconds rise time. And these occur surprisingly frequently in BT lines and so forth. The immediate effects of these sort of hits are increased porosity in underground cables. What actually happens is that a number of sparks form between the conductors and the ground. The conductors, of course, are at exchange potential, and the ground is temporarily at a very high potential, and the polythene insulation breaks down. And what happens, of course, is you get lots and lots of tiny micropores in the cable, and everything's fine until it rains, and then the cable fails. So it may not be immediately connected with the lightning strike. And there's a reciprocal law that applies here. If you're going to get hit by a 1 kV pulse once a year, you get hit roughly by 500 volt pulses twice a year, and so forth. Electronics protection. Well, there's basically 2 commonly used ones in electronics. There's a gas discharge tube, which is basically just a tube with a gas in it, which breaks down at high voltage. Combined with an avalanche diode. The problem with gas discharge is it's got a limited life. It can only take so many hits. It's comparatively slow to act. Remember, this thing is ramping up within 10 microseconds. And even worse, when it fails open circuit. So you've actually got no protection once it fails. The other type of surge arrestor is a metal oxide varistor, which has a non-linear characteristic, resistance characteristic. As the voltage increases, so the resistance drops markedly. These also have a limited life, and they fail to short circuit, so they catch fire. So at least you know they've failed, but whatever. Okay, so they're usually combined with a slow blow fuse. In these surge arresting type distribution boards, it's usually MOVs combined with a slow blow fuse, which then lights up a neon. Okay, economics. When do you protect? Well, if the device is cheap, you don't bother with protection. Telephones aren't worth bothering with, really. They're so cheap, you just throw them away. If the device is expensive, like a data center, then you probably do need to put lightning protection, and it's worth the trouble. And insurance may depend on lightning protection. I'm on a parochial church council, and we have to have the church lightning conductor tested every year, and there's a British standard for lightning conductors which we have to comply with. The cheapest way of protecting against lightning is probably to plant trees, but this only has an effect in sort of 20 to 30 years' time, because trees do actually get struck by lightning. They work quite well as lightning conductors, and if they're tall enough and you plant them around your data center, they will attract the lightning, as opposed to your data center or your church tower or whatever. General personal advice: if in a thunderstorm, stay inside. It's basically the simplest advice. If you're outside, try and lie down, get yourself as low as possible, lie flat on the ground so that you don't sort of end up with the up one leg and down the other effect. And when to do this is you use the standard flash boom test. You know, you see the lightning, you hear the boom, you count 5 seconds, and it's 5 miles. It's a mile away per 5 seconds. If the storm is less than 5 miles away, take precautions. Stay indoors until 30 minutes after the last thunder's heard. Questions? Be quick, because I've run out of time. And I'm not an expert on lightning, by the way.
Sorry, only one question per lightning talk, please.
Very quick one. It's more of a comment than a question. It's related to what we do. We have a blip graph that keeps track of customers losing connectivity and regaining based on our radius thing. And years ago, we suddenly spotted had this sort of lump on the bottom with lots of customers per minute losing connections. We thought it was a fault in BT. It wasn't until we plotted these on a graph of the UK based on their postcode, we spotted what we were tracking was a lightning storm across the UK. So we've actually got a graph that shows lightning storms based on ADSL lines dropping out.
Oh, excellent. That's fascinating. There is actually a band of the country which is mostly on granite, where lightning strikes are far more serious because the ground conductivity is much higher. Okay. I'd be interested in seeing that. That's it, I think, isn't it? Is that it? Finished?
Well, since Brandon has been grinding away making our webcast today, I'll allow him an extra question.
Yeah, do you have any data on data center outages due to lightning, both actual and claimed?
No. Okay, right. Thank you very much, everyone.